Morning.
Morning. It's not cutting me out.
Kate's changed her settings, so we've got a full good morning there.
Yeah.
Full
No
good
cutting
morning.
me out anymore. Although you might hear strange chair noises and things throughout the episode because my chair creaks every time I move.
Great. That's just exactly what everybody wants to hear.
I did think that. I thought, what do people want to hear? True crime? No. Cryptids?
Creaky
No.
chairs.
Creaky chairs.
Done.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, apologies about the audio on the last episode because apparently it decides to cut me out because it thinks my voice is background noise. So
Yes, we're background noise.
every other word, it's like, oh, that's not a very nice sound. I'll cut that out.
No, so, and I can hear myself now because I've got my audio and everything set up differently. And I can hear that every time I laugh, it's booming into the microphone. So that's great. I'll have to try and work that out. Sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about it. It's going to be an ASMR edition today, unfortunately.
Yeah.
On behalf of Ma.
No, it's going to be lovely because we are on part 3 of it will be a 4-part,
Yes.
a 4-parter. So,
Well, we need to hear the whole story. You can't be skimping on details. So 4-part, great.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
So, before we crack on, we have some shout outs to do. So, we'll do some quick shout outs. Yes. We have got some new subscribers to our Blamley. So, welcome to our new Blamley members. Joining us, we have Ricky.
All right, Ricky.
Ricky.
Is he from the UK, do you know?
I don't know.
Because if he is, he's going to be like, for fuck's sake, I ain't heard that before, have I?
Ricky. Yep. And
thanks, Ricky. Thanks for joining the Blamley.
And also Suzanne. Not the cat, Suzanne.
Oh. Hi, Suzanne. Thanks for joining the Blamley.
So there are plenty of ways that you can join the Blamley. You can click the link on the episode and you can go on the website and there's a huge section for joining the Blamley that is literally in your face. Just click it.
I could see that coming. Yeah. For anyone who's listening on audio and not video, Sarah is literally the embodiment of a fireball.
I was talking to someone the other day and I said it's so frustrating because when you get a hot flush, I know that my face is going, I can feel it coming up and I think, oh my God, they're looking at me thinking, what the fuck? She's literally about to combust.
Yeah. And they'd be right.
I'm going to separate this. I'm going to turn this into a short and I'm going to put it on our socials so you can see it happen in real life.
Yep.
Right. So anyways, if you do want to join the Blamley, then there's plenty of ways to do that. You get access to tons and tons of additional content and you help support our podcast and you help enable us to keep bringing you mediocre sound.
Mediocre sound.
Mediocre at best.
Yeah.
But again, we obviously, based on the sound quality, do need to upgrade some components. So the more subscribers we get, the more we're going to be able to upgrade and bring you better episodes.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And if you're just joining us, and this is the first time you've heard any of our episodes, I'm telling you now, we're extremely professional.
Always so.
Very, very professional.
Yes.
And also,
go on.
Random Blams. Go.
Knew you was going to do that.
I know.
My random blam is one that we came upon by accident this morning and I went, oh, I'm using that. That's my random blam.
Nice.
We was watching a documentary on the telly, or Isaac was while he was getting ready for school, and there's a woodpecker. Woodpecking. And Josie was like, oh, do you know they've got a really long tongue and it enables them to go into the tree like really high up. Where they just create a little hole, put their tongue in it, get the bugs out. But then to store their tongue, it goes around their brain, which I knew that, and I think I've done that as a blam before. Yeah. But Isaac was like, can they not taste their brain then? If their tongues, like, typical children questions that we wouldn't have thought of. He was like,
That's brilliant.
can they not taste their brain if their tongue is wrapping around their brain? So I obviously Googled it. And while it didn't say that they could taste their brain, it did say that their brain, their tongue wrapped around their brain acts as a shock absorber. So when they're drilling into the trees,
Oh, it holds their head.
it acts as a cushioning around the brain so they don't get rattly brain damage.
That's brilliant.
Oh, I know.
That's a good question, though.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
If there's one thing the boy knows how to do, it's ask questions on everything.
Yes. I'm going to do another positive pickle. I don't know if I've mentioned, but these positive pickles came from Maddie, who's one of our listeners.
Yeah.
And honestly, Maddie, I'm so appreciative of these. These wicked. Right, pick one, Sarah.
That one.
All right. This one.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
Can we hear it?
What's pickies? In a world full of pickies, be delightful.
Does it say pickies or pickles?
It says pickies.
Oh no! What? In a world full of pickies. Oh, be delightful. Well, yeah, sure. Well,
Yeah.
maybe that one's for you.
I
Kate.
think it meant pricks. But they're too cute to say the word prick. Yeah. I think it was all right. I'm going to change it. In a world full of pricks, be delightful.
Yeah.
Nice. All right.
All right. Well, let's crack on, shall we?
Yep. Random blams.
Done. So we left part 2 with the death of 8 more of the survivors via a very unexpected avalanche, which left 19 of them trapped inside the fuselage of the plane, unharmed, but rapidly running out of oxygen, if you remember.
I do.
So let's start part 3. Trigger warning, this episode contains depiction of the consumption of human flesh, which some people might find disturbing. After the second avalanche here and the men waited for morning in the now snow-filled fuselage, you can imagine they were absolutely freezing. They were lying on the snow. They didn't have room to even sit up. There was about maybe a bit more than a foot gap between the snow that now filled the plane and the roof of the fuselage. And
That's so claustrophobic inducing, isn't it?
It is also, but to stop hypothermia from setting in, they had to move. They had to keep moving. They had to move around.
Yeah.
So in the centre of the fuselage, they actually dug down into the snow, kind of heaping the remnants to either end of the plane. So in the middle, they had like a dugout that created them enough space for about 4 of them to sit in and then 1 of them to stand. And the one standing was actually in charge of kind of stomping on them all. Like standing on their feet and the people that were sitting, and the people that were sitting were repeatedly kicking and punching each other's arms and legs just to keep the blood flowing. And this is actually mentioned a lot in the book, the fact that the men would take turns hitting each other, and their reasons for doing it were because it would keep them warm and it would help keep the blood flowing. So I actually looked it up because I thought perhaps it's some sort of survival technique, and it does provide warmth and it does do that. But it actually says it's very dangerous to do. Because in extreme cold, the blood vessels in your extremities, so in your arms and your legs, restricts, meaning that there's less blood in those areas and more blood circulating your organs. So less blood flow in the arms and legs means that any sort of physical blow to it would do more damage to the tissue and muscle, because there's not blood, oxygen, nutrients going to that area to help with the impact of the blows. So for me, that just kind of showed how desperate these men were, that they were so cold that they were just trying anything they could do to elicit a small bit of warmth into themselves.
I can't imagine how uncomfortable and painful and horrible that would have been. I really can't.
Yeah.
I'm no good with the cold.
No. Well, I think you'd have to be, wouldn't you? But every bit of warmth that they had managed to formulate in the days prior to the avalanche, so the blankets that they'd sewn together from the chair covers, the cushions, the extra clothing, everything was now buried at the bottom of the fuselage, underneath the snow, and was now soaking wet and frozen solid. When the men realised that they were starting to run out of oxygen, it was Roy Harley climbed to the back of the plane, to the opening of the plane, which was now completely sealed shut with snow from top to bottom. It was completely sealed off. And he used his hands to try and tunnel through the thick snow and up, so out of the snow and then up. But he shoveled the snow away with his hands, but they were buried too deep. So the more he tunnelled, the harder the snow became, until it was like trying to dig through blocks of ice. Because the temperature was so cold that the snow would just freeze. So he gave up and went back into the others. They needed another plan. So Nando looked around and he found a long metal pole that had been used to build the hammocks. So with weak, frozen, shaking arms, he gripped this freezing cold metal pole with both hands, and with not much room to move it, he jammed it hard up into the metal of the plane's roof. But the metal didn't give, so he tried again, summoning energy into his arms as he pounded it back into the roof. And the metal did splinter, allowing Nando to push the metal rod up through the broken fuselage now and up through the snow. The jagged end of the pole allowed him to push up through the compact snow and ice until he felt the resistance give. When he pulled the rod back down into the fuselage, he was able to see the star-strewn night sky. That helped the oxygen situation temporarily, but it didn't help the fact that they were still buried under quite a few feet of snow. So through the light of the small hole, the men waited for daylight to appear, trying to keep warm by the fire of 5 lighters and get any semblance of sleep that they could. At the first sight of daylight, the men could see a few rays of light coming from the front of the plane. It seemed that the snow on the cockpit windscreen wasn't quite as thick. But to get to the cockpit, the men would have to tunnel through the snow. Using their bare hands, 6 of the men that were able to took turns digging into the snow. As one dug, the others removed the debris snow to stop that from piling up and filling the hole that they were now creating. And it was Gustavo Zabino that tunnelled past the dead pilots to reach the cockpit window, which was angled up towards the sky. However, try as he might, he was unable to push the window open due to the weight of the snow. Perhaps because his arms were so tired from digging the last leg of the tunnel. So Robert Canessa crawled through the makeshift tunnel and also tried in vain to open the window. It was Roy Harley that was finally able to push the glass out and push his head through the snow and out into the fresh air. He knew it was early morning, but the sky was darker than usual, and he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. The wind whipped the snow around fiercely, stinging the exposed flesh of his hands and face. He crawled back down through the hole and told them that there was a fierce blizzard currently, so they would have to wait it out inside the plane. But the good news is they at least had a way out. For 3 days, the men huddled in the fuselage, away from the relentless blizzard. Each day marked one of the men's birthday. Numa Tocati and Pancho Delgado turned 25, and Carlitos turned 19. They spent their time discussing what they would do when the blizzard finally stopped. Some argued that they should leave right away before another avalanche kills them. Others argued they were safer inside the plane and waiting until the weather got better. One of the men remembered a conversation he had had in Santiago with a taxi driver. He mentioned that the official start of summer was the 15th of November and the snow would be no more. But that was still 2 weeks away. The blizzard brought fresh snow into the plane via the tunnel they had dug, so the men had to scoop this snow up, and they melted it into their parched mouths, so they at least had a small amount of drinking water. But they were starving and out of energy, their bodies burning through their calorie stores just trying to keep warm. By the third day, they were desperate. They had guessed the blizzard would end at some point, but didn't know how much longer they would be without food. The bodies they had been consuming lay outside the plane, buried now under even more snow. But they did have the bodies of their friends that had died in the avalanche. They dug down to retrieve the body of one of their friends. One of them, a survivor of a plane crash. Someone they had all slept in close quarters with and survived weeks in the Andes with. Someone until very recently they had all been laughing with. But this was survival. They hadn't come this far to just give up. Using anything sharp they could find, they hacked away pieces of flesh from bone. They no longer had the luxury of drying it up on the roof and thawing it out. Some consumed the flesh raw. So hungry, they were now eating huge chunks at a time, having to chew the meat before swallowing. Others, the revulsion of eating their friends was too much and they refused to eat. Their physical condition deteriorated rapidly as a result. The 1st of November came, and it was the third day of being trapped inside the plane, and finally the blizzard had stopped and the sky was clear. So the men set about their new task. Emptying the fuselage of snow, retrieving their belongings at the bottom and bringing the dead outside. It took the men 8 days to clear enough of the plane of snow to make it more comfortable. The snow inside had frozen and it was like breaking through concrete to retrieve the dead at the bottom of the fuselage, frozen like statues in their last positions before the avalanche had hit. It was these bodies that would now have to feed the 19. The makeshift graveyard outside was now buried under too much snow and ice to be of use anymore. As they retrieved the dead, they stripped them of their clothing. Being mildly warmer brought no comfort to the men as they donned their dead friends' clothing. As the men waited for November the 15th to roll around, they set about deciding on who would go on the expedition, because this was to be the expedition. They needed the strongest, the fittest, the most determined of them all. Some of the survivors were deemed out of the running. Arturo Nogueira had a broken leg and swollen ankles that looked infected, and Rafael, his legs were black with gangrene. Others that refused still to eat their share of meat weren't allowed to go. Anyone that they thought would hold up the team wouldn't be going. It was decided that Nando Parrado would be going. Even if it was decided by the group that they didn't want him to go, they knew he would just leave of his own accord. He was headstrong and so determined to find rescue. If it had been up to him, he would have left straight after the avalanche. Robert Canessa was also chosen. He was smart. He thought of different obstacles they would face and was also able to think of solutions, and he remained calm under pressure. Antonio Vincentine, nicknamed Tintin, was also chosen. He was one of the strongest on the rugby team with strong legs. And the last to be chosen to join the team was Numa Tocati. He had been on 2 previous expeditions and had made it back. He knew what to expect. They discussed which way they should head. The previous expedition had headed west to the largest mountain peak where they believed they would be able to see what lay beyond. However, they were deceived by the distance and only ever made it to a few false peaks where they came across sections of the plain. They never was able to reach the top of the mountain and now believed that unachievable. So they should go east then. They had a route through the valley which would lead them around the large peak instead of over it. However, many believed they would never be able to make it that far. Nando strongly believed they should go west. He thought he would be able to make the climb, while Robert Canessa believed they should go east. Robert, being the more fiery of the two, won out. The four of them would travel east. They had their plan. They had their troop. They just needed to physically prepare and wait for better weather. These four men were exempt from any sort of duties: cleaning, water, meat. They needed to rest. They were given extra portions of meat. Many had gotten over their revulsion of human flesh and had started eating organs. The liver was packed full of vitamins, the heart full of protein, the kidneys full of minerals, and the brain full of omega-3. If they were going to utilise what their friends had to offer, then they shouldn't waste anything. The bodies would be picked clean before they moved on to the next. The bones were left for anyone hungry enough to pick them clean. As the date of the 15th drew nearer, the men grew excited. Their mantra was, "We're going to be home in time for Christmas." And that's what drove most of the men. They worked hard to find solutions to the problems the four might face on their journey. The cold. Tintin managed to sew together 6 pairs of mittens from the fabric of the seat covers. Roberto had made himself a knapsack out of a pair of trousers so that he was able to carry food and water. But the most pressing issue was the cold snow on their feet. If their feet got frostbitten, they wouldn't be able to walk anymore. They had rugby boots and some socks and plastic bags, but nothing else they could really use. On the other expeditions, they had used cushions as snowshoes, but when the snow started to melt, these cushions just absorbed the water and made their legs incredibly heavy. They needed thick, warm socks. What could they use as an extra pair of warm socks? Between them, they decided to put the bodies of their friends to even further use. They found that if they made 2 incisions in the forearm, one by the elbow and one up the middle of the forearm, they could peel away the flesh and fat. And once they'd sewn it together and sewed up one end, a person's foot would fit quite easily inside the flesh, with the heel fitting snugly into the skin of the elbow.
Oh, mate, I had no idea they did that.
The night before the 15th of November, Arturo died in his sleep. There was nothing that could be done for the infection coursing through his body. His leg was gangrenous, and it was only a matter of time. So he was laid to rest with the others, soon to be dug up and consumed as their supply of food dwindled with each day. His death wasn't in vain. It spurred the group on. It lit a metaphorical fire in their bellies. They needed to find help before any more died. The morning of the 15th of November, the sky is overcast. The temperature's a little above freezing. They are ready. They bid farewell to the survivors, with their spirits high. Today is the day they've all been waiting for. The 4 men set off, determined. It will be them that is going to be the saviours. They are going to find help and get the other survivors off the mountain. Nando is leading the way. His drive and determination is admirable, and the others keep pace. Less than an hour into the hike, the sky rapidly turns dark. The clouds are black. The wind fiercely picks up, and the temperature drops well below minus. "We have to go back." a shout from somewhere behind Nando. He can't hear who it's coming from, and he can no longer see the others. The snow that has begun to pour from the sky is making it impossible to see anything. They rally to find each other and together agree to head back to the plane. The journey back takes them hours. And they collapse back into the fuselage where the survivors are huddled together out of the weather. They knew that if they had continued, they would have died. But this doesn't squash their determination. They just needed to wait for the blizzard to end, and then the weather would be good for a few days. They would leave then. It was the morning of November 17th, their 5th week. The blizzard had finally stopped and the sun was shining. The 2 days had allowed for even more planning. Fito Strouch had turned half a suitcase into a sled, using 2 strips of fabric as shoulder straps. This allowed the men to lighten their backpacks. They filled the sled with a wine bottle full of water, some rugby socks filled with meat, and handmade blankets. In those 2 days, Numa Takati had developed an infection in his leg, which meant he was now a liability on the trek, so he was no longer permitted to come. So they decided it would just be the 3 of them. Once again, Nando, Roberto, and Tintin bundled layer upon layer upon layer of clothing, donned their human skin socks, and left. Roberto pulled the sled, but it didn't slow him down. They made good progress, their studded rugby boots gripping the frozen snow well. It wasn't long before they had surpassed the area where they had had to retreat 2 days prior, so this was now uncharted territory. None of them had headed this far east before. They knew Chile lay to the west, but they'd hoped that this eastern valley looped around in a U-shape and actually would lead them west. Off in the distance, something caught Robert Canessa's eye. It kind of spurred him on, a bit faster, gaining a lead on the other 2 until he was almost out of sight. Tintin and Nando hurried to catch up, wondering what on earth had gotten into Roberto. They were only a few hours into their trek and they needed to keep their strength. Appearing from the top of the hill, Roberto wandered back down towards the men, smiling like a Cheshire cat. "I've got a surprise for you." The 2 men looked at each other. "What?" He beckoned for them both to follow him up the incline. Heads down, they trekked up the steep hill. "Look up, boys." As they approached the top of the hill, Nando and Tintin looked ahead. They could now clearly see the elusive, unmistakable tail section of the plane. But it wasn't necessarily the tail section that held their attention. It was the discarded suitcases around the tail that they ran for. It was like finding treasure. They each ran for a separate suitcase, finding jeans, jumpers, woolen socks, a box of chocolates, lots of cartons of cigarettes, a bottle of rum, and some comic books. They immediately stripped off their human flesh socks and donned a few pairs of the woolen socks each, and then they went inside the plane to retrieve the plane's batteries, because that had been their plan originally. Find the batteries in the tail section and get the plane's intercom radio working. Then all they had to do was radio to the towers for help. They wasn't hard to locate in the tail section, but they were heavy. And by the time they had thoroughly searched the plane, the sun was starting to set and the temperatures were dropping, so they decided to spend the night in the tail section. They ingeniously connected the battery wires to a light bulb to give them light. They lit a small fire using some cardboard they'd found. They ate some chocolates, drank some rum, read some comic books, and cooked some meat over their fire. With full bellies, they somewhat enjoyed a decent night's sleep. They rose early in the morning. It was snowing a little bit, despite the reassurance that snow ended on the 15th of November. They packed the suitcase sled with their new finds and left the batteries inside the plane and continued on. When the sky was clear and the sun was overhead, they actually grew too hot. The reflection of the sun from the snow bounced up and burned their faces. And it was too much energy to strip off layers of clothing and then put the layers of clothing back on. So after hours of walking, they decided that they needed to rest. They came to rest at a rocky outcropping. It provided a small element of shade and flat ground to rest on. Using the blankets that they'd made and the metal poles they had brought from the hammocks that they'd made inside the fuselage, they fashioned together a tent of sorts and sat huddled underneath it in the shade to eat and rest. Looking out of their tent, they could all see what lay before them. The valley they were walking in, that they hoped turned west, led them straight to a huge mountain. They had no way to climb it. It was so large it could have fitted a whole town. If they continued following the valley, they would need to walk around this mountain. And if it didn't make a U-turn like they assumed it would, and didn't lead them west, then they would just be headed deeper and deeper into the Andes with every step. Each man was lost in their own thoughts, not wanting to voice their opinion. If they turned back now, it would be a devastating blow. As they waited for their energy levels to rise, the sun began to set. The temperatures which had them seeking shelter from the sun now had them seeking shelter from the freezing cold. They decided to spend the night right where they were, but the cold wind was too much for them to bear. They needed more shelter, so with their bare hands, they dug down into the snow. A big enough space for the three of them to huddle out of the wind and perhaps try to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. They spent the entire night lying one on top of the other, using their body heat so they wouldn't freeze and die. Back at the fuselage, the rest of the survivors were in better spirits. They were certain they would only have to endure the cold nights for a few more days. Help was coming. But help came too late for Raphael. His gangrenous leg took his life on the 18th of November. A reminder to them all that until help actually arrived, they were all vulnerable, all weak, and all nearing death's door. Nando, Roberto, and Tintin rose as soon as the sun did, not wanting to spend any more time in the freezing snow. But how did they want to proceed? Roberto told the group that they couldn't go on. It would take too long to go around the mountain, not knowing if the route would head west. They'd barely survived last night, and it had been a clear night. What would happen if a blizzard hit? They would all die. But Nando wanted to continue. For the sake of the others, they were counting on them. But what use would they be if they were lying dead in the snow? So Tintin was the deciding vote. Continue on in the hope the long trek would lead them west, where they would then have an even longer trek to salvation, or head back to the tower section, retrieve the batteries, and try and get the radio working. So with a heavy heart, it was decided they would turn back. But it was no easy feat. It meant climbing back the way they had come, at inclines at sometimes 45-degree angles. And when they made it back to the tower section, they flopped down, utterly exhausted. But they only had moments to rest before they would need to gather everything and get moving again before night set in. They didn't want to spend another night outside of the fuselage of the plane. Roberto and Tintin went to get the plane's batteries from their housing. They also found some padded insulation that wrapped around the plane's heating pipes and decided to strip that and take it with them. Tintin thought it would make a good insulation to sew inside his jacket for extra warmth. They loaded everything in the suitcase sled, the extra clothing, the cigarettes, the insulation, and last but not least, the coveted batteries. After Roberto placed the second one into the sled, it sank deeply into the snow. There was no way they could drag this heavy sled through the snow all the way back to the plane. In the end, they decided that the plane's radio system would be easy enough to dismantle and small enough to bring to the tail section where the batteries were. There always seemed to be a problem. Always seemed to be something or some reason why their plan failed. But they always came up with a new one. Before they left the tail section, Nando hastily wrote a message in varying places on the white fuselage of the plane with some nail polish he had found. Go up. 18 survivors still alive. He wasn't yet aware that there were now only 17. When they returned to the Fairchild, it was with exuberance. They knew now they couldn't reach Chile by going east, but they had the batteries now, and they were going to radio for help. The very next day, Roberto and Nando were in the cockpit, trying desperately to retrieve the radio from the control panel that was buried deep into the pilots' chests. It turned out not to be too difficult. They actually had a screwdriver and a set of pliers at their disposal. The difficult part was that when they removed it, there was an immense amount of wires trailing out the back. 76 to be exact. It was clear to them that this was only half the radio. The radio needed to be connected to the transmitter. But finding it and freeing it was the hard part. It took days to finally locate it and disconnect it and then collate all of the pieces. The transmitter also had 76 wires, so they were sure they had the correct parts. But now what? It wasn't just a case of matching up the colours and connecting the wires, although after hours of fiddling with everything, they did figure out a code on each wire that made some sense to them and enabled them to connect them up. By no means an expert, Roberto spent days trying to assemble it. It was almost like his baby. It was his project. He had all of his hopes pinned on this radio working. Like Marcelo, who had firmly believed that they would be rescued and was a completely broken man after learning they had called off the search. So he was desperate to get this radio working. But if he was really honest with himself, he was well out of his depth. He had no idea what he was doing. But perhaps there was someone else who did. Roy Harley. He had helped Marcelo get the transistor radio working and had made an aerial so that they could listen to the stations. The only problem with that is that Roy had become a shell of his former self. Weeks ago, he had wanted to join the expedition, but was deemed not fit enough by the others. Since then, he had given up, barely eating his rations of meat and becoming weaker and weaker, never even leaving the plane, and now so weak he was unable to even walk the short length of the fuselage. He had become a burden of somewhat, asking the others for help, getting them to help him stand when he probably could have stood himself, or getting them to pass him things instead of doing it himself. When Roberto told Roy he was needed to go to the tail section, Roy refused. He didn't want to go. He would die if he made the trip. But through all of his whinging, it was agreed that Roy would join Nando, Tintin and Roberto for another trip to the tail in a few days' time, once Roy was a bit stronger. Their journey only took them around an hour and a half, and Roy was surprised by his own fitness. The journey hadn't taken a huge toll, and all they had to do now was connect the radio and the transmitter to the battery and connect the aerial that they had taken from the roof of the cockpit. But this would actually take them days to do. And back in the fuselage, while the 4 men were trying to figure out the radio, the remaining 13 survivors were rapidly running out of bodies to use. Of the 8 that had died in the avalanche, they only had 2 left, with the remaining bodies being buried far too deep in the snow. But as the temperature started to change, the group was plagued by another challenge. The snow had started to melt, and this meant that the bodies that they had buried underneath the shallow snow were now being exposed to the sun, and they found that the meat would rot very quickly if left out. So then they had to heap snow onto the bodies to keep them fresh, while now trying to dig down into the deeper snow to find the other bodies. And they were quite ingenious in their attempts. They dug tunnels down into the snow with steps to make it easier to climb down and climb back up.
Wow.
But they would spend days and days and days digging to find nothing. They would make these steps in the snow and then reach down and not find what they'd been looking for. Or find women when it was they decided that they wouldn't eat the women. So then they would have to then start again and dig somewhere else. So they needed to start utilising more of the bodies that they had. Parts that they wouldn't normally eat, like the hands and feet, or the bone marrow, which they took to digging out the wires, and the brain. The brain itself wasn't very nice to eat, so the survivors took to boiling it in water, adding pieces of intestines, liver, and kidney, and making it into a soup which was a bit more palatable. Their bodies and mouths were screaming for something other than strips of meat. The only problem with the soup is that they had no bowls to eat it from. Well, while they were opening skulls to remove the brain, they might as well use the skull as a bowl. And thus the group made 4 skull bowls and some spoons out of bones, and just hoped and prayed that the 4 men at the tail section were getting the radio working and help would soon be on the way. But back at the tail, things weren't going to plan. Roy and Roberto had managed to connect up the battery and radio after a lot of sparking when wrong wires were connected and a lot of effing and blinding and jeffing. They connected the aerial, the headphones and microphone, and turned the dial. But still nothing. Roy had brought the transistor radio and connected that to the aerial and was able to receive a lot of new radio stations, so he knew the aerial wasn't the problem. He kept the radio station playing while he worked, and some news came over the radio which greeted the 4 men with mixed reviews. They were sending 1 plane out to resume the search. Roy was elated. Robert was somewhat happy. Tintin was indifferent. And Nando was disappointed. Now some of them would want to wait to be rescued, and he couldn't sit about any longer. But others thought that now the snow was melting, they would be easier to see. So they dragged out some luggage and made a cross in the snow with it. In the 8 days that they had been in the tail section, the snow around the plane had melted quite considerably, revealing even more buried suitcases for them to rifle through, and had actually left the tail propped up on a ledge of snow that hadn't melted due to the shadow of the tail. And it was on the 8th day of trying to get the radio sorted, that they decided that their efforts were futile, and the tail was now too dangerous to be in. If the snow melted anymore, it could just slide down the mountain. If the men thought the trek back to the Fairchild was bad, it was nothing compared to the sight that greeted them back at the plane. The 13 men were in a bad way. They were skeletal. 8 days away showed the 4 men just how much weight they were all losing, while the inside of the plane showed them just how desperate for food they had gotten. It was littered with picked clean bones, split open skulls and gutted carcasses. If they didn't get off the mountain soon, they never would. It was nearing the end of the first week of December. Nando and Tintin were packed and ready to go. They just needed Roberto. It would be these 3 that would make the final expedition to find help. They agreed that they would either come back with help or they would die trying. They were completely out of options. The weather was warmer now in the day, so warm actually that the men's skin burnt, their lips parched and cracked, and they had to resort to making tents to sit in the shade. The night temperatures, however, still plummeted to -degrees, which was the only issue they now faced on their expedition. Sleeping on the mountains was perilous. However, with the insulation they had taken from the plane, which was lightweight and flimsy, the men had sewn it into the blankets they had made and fashioned a well-insulated sleeping bag big enough for 3 men. With them all sleeping together in the bag, the insulation would keep their body temperature inside. Nando, in particular, was fired up and ready to go. He wasn't suffering quite as much as the others. As one of the sole expeditionaries, he had been entitled to extra rations for weeks. Roberto, however, was delaying leaving. He didn't want to risk their life while there was still hope of the plane finding them. And after a heated argument, he asked for 10 days. Let's wait 10 days for the plane to find us, and if it doesn't, then we can go. Nando gave him 5. They would be leaving on the 12th of December. In those 5 days, the men gathered up all of their belongings, their documents, some toothpaste, some foundation that they had found because it contained SPF, rugby socks full of meat, most of the medicine from the medicine box they had found in the towel section. Nando gathered up some of his mother's and sister's belongings. They didn't want to leave anything behind. The night before they were due to depart, Numa Takati died. The sores in his legs had gotten infected, and the poison had swept through his body. His death was what Roberto needed to light the fire in his belly. Tomorrow, they would be leaving, and they wouldn't be coming back. And that is end of part 3. So part 4 is the final expedition.
Actually getting home. Or not.
Or not.
We don't know. Well, no. You do.
Yes.
I have to say, that contained a lot of information that I had absolutely no idea.
Yeah, a lot of... I've had to read the book because the book contains all of the information. The book is a first-hand account. I think it's called Alive. And it does contain a lot of information, and a lot of which I haven't put in because otherwise I would be writing the book. So I have picked and chosen what to include and what not to include. There's a lot of days to fill, isn't there? There's a lot of days. There's a lot of things that they do and try and do and things like that. But they survived so far. They're in their 5th, 6th, 7th week now. And they have survived, and they've had to survive off of human bodies. So all of that comes with its own, problems as well. Like the fact that if you're just eating meat all day, every day, that's not good for your body.
No.
Just eating meat. And then you'd want to eat something else. It would be awful. So then they try to make the soup to try and get it down and be a bit more palatable, because although they knew they needed to eat, otherwise they would die, it's still... Look at what they were faced with.
Oh, just awful. And I thought that it was like... all of my information about the crash in the Andes is from the film Alive.
Right.
That's it. I don't know anything... Well, I do now. But in the film, there's... they talk about cannibalism and the fact that they had to eat, people that had, not survived the crash, not survived the bit after the crash. But in the film, it's portrayed as very sort of, they take a couple of little pieces of meat from the buttocks of, one of the people. I honestly thought that was the extent of it. I had no idea no idea the extent of it. That is absolutely horrendous. Yeah, no clue.
But you can't blame them for it though,
absolutely
can you?
not.
That was their only food source. If you had a chicken carcass here,
smart.
and that was your only thing that you could eat, is that chicken, you would pick it clean.
Absolutely. You've got to do whatever you need to do to survive.
Yeah. So they would.
I'm in full agreement of it. If anything like that happened, and I didn't survive, eat me.
But exactly, and that's the opinion that they had. If I die, eat me. Do what you need to do. And so that's kind of how they thought the rest of the survivors would have thought that as well. But they tried to. Your body doesn't need just meat. It needs all sorts of things. It needs salts. Salt was one of the things they were massively lacking in their diet. They didn't get enough salts at all. But they tried
that's really dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
Really dangerous.
So they tried to eat like testicles and things like that to try and get that element of salt, and that's why they were eating the liver, the heart, any organ, because they contain vitamins and nutrients. So I actually think it was so ingenious of the things that they did with the bodies in order to survive. If they hadn't, they wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And so as hard as it is to hear and to picture, can you imagine how difficult it must have been for them?
I don't think anyone can.
Especially after the avalanche, because fair enough, if after the plane crash and those bodies had died, they'd been dead for 5 or 6 days before they decided, right, we're running out of food, we need to eat them. That's still a length of period where that's separation. Whereas the bodies that had died in the avalanche had happened not long at all. And they'd built up such a closer bond because it had been, they were the survivors. They were eating, sleeping, shitting, everything in close quarters. So close quarters that it would have been so much harder to have eaten those bodies instead of perhaps the other ones.
Definitely, because it would have been like we've all gone through this together. We've all survived a plane crash together, and now we're just trying to do whatever we can to survive and get home. You will have had conversations with those people. Don't worry, we're going to get home. We're going to get through this. We're going to survive this.
Yeah.
And then obviously you're sitting there knowing that they didn't survive it. Yeah. So I definitely think that I just there's no words. I don't think anyone can fully imagine what that must have been like for them.
No.
But genius guys. Yeah. Genius.
Very genius. But so part 4 is the last part, and it is coming next week.
I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finally, after all this uncomfortableness and
we'll get some closure.
Feeling cold and feeling claustrophobic.
Josie had said to me, so Josie wanted a survival story. She was like, please do a survival. I love the survival stories. I love the in-depth one. Please do a survival story. But don't do one in the snow because I don't want to feel cold. do one in the desert or something. I don't want to feel cold.
And you were like, too late.
I found one. I've met
50% of your request.
She said to me, why don't you do the survival story about me in this relationship? It's like, shut up.
You were like, that hasn't been concluded yet, whether or not you survive. We don't know.
And it has been quite cold.
It's very cold.
Yeah. All right, well, I guess I'll see you next week then for part 4.
Thank you very much. Are we going to have our discussion about how we feel about cannibalism?
Well, I'd like to bring up the fact as well that actually they don't call it cannibalism. It's called something else. Cannibalism is the act of killing and eating somebody.
Oh, okay.
Just eating human flesh. It's called something else, and it's something like let me go back through my notes. I've got it in here.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah, I had no idea.
So they don't like it when people have said it's cannibalism or they were cannibals or things like that, because the annotation, I don't know the word. What's associated with that word of a cannibal is someone that kills and eats.
Description of that terminology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I can't
that's
find what it's
interesting.
called, but I will bring it to the table next week.
Yeah. So it's not the act. Cannibalism is killing someone to consume.
It's not technically. If you Google it, it's not technically. Okay. But the connotation, that's the word I was thinking for. The connotation associated with cannibalism is killing and eating. So they prefer a different terminology. I say it's slipped my mind, but I will bring it to the table next week.
Yeah. No, we'll have a connotation. We'll have a conversation about that next week. But yeah, cool. If you guys have listened to this and you've got a feeling about whether you would, whether you wouldn't, we would like to hear, so that we can include it in our discussion on the next episode.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I'll see you next week.
I'll see you all next week. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
That might be it for today's episode, but if you fancy even more weird and wonderful episodes,
head over to perplexedpodcast.com and become a Blamley member for just $5 a month.
You'll get an extra episode every month, plus loads of juicy bonus bits, like really in-depth case files.
All the links are in the show notes.
Come hang out with us on socials too.
And don't forget to follow the show and drop us a cheeky review.
Until next time, bye.
Bye. Oh, I can see right up her. Jesus.
Did you not want that? Suzanne, come on, be a lady.
Come on, mate.